There is a $10 million mistake in this contract, and Julian Thorne just signed it with a smirk on his face. He thinks he just stripped me of my voting rights. He thinks he's finally free of the quiet girl who knows too much. What he doesn't know is that the signature he just used to rob me is the same one that authorizes an immediate audit of his Cayman accounts. Julian just started a war he can't afford to lose. Would you save the man who betrayed you, or would you let him burn? They say that when you're drowning, the world goes quiet. I used to think that was a metaphor. I didn't realize that you could drown in a room full of people, under the glow of $1,000 chandelier, with a glass of vintage champagne in your hand. My name is Alara. And tonight, I realize that I've been holding my breath for 5 years. Pennsylvania winters are cruel. They're gray, bone-chilling, and they have a way of stripping the leaves off the trees until everything looks exposed. That's how I felt standing in the Rittenhouse ballroom. Exposed. I looked at my reflection in the gilded mirror by the coatroom. The dress was a deep, midnight navy. I had bought it with my own dividends, the 30% stake I held in Thorne Global. I wasn't just a guest tonight. I was a founder. I was the one who stayed up until dawn in the early days, coding the infrastructure while Julian slept. I was the one who liquidated my inheritance from my grandmother to keep us afloat when the venture capitalists laughed in our faces. I wasn't just a shareholder. I was the heartbeat of that company. But as I watched Julian Thorne across the room, I realized he had developed a very short memory. Julian was in his element. He stood at the center of a circle of Pennsylvania's most powerful men, old money, steel magnates, tech giants. He looked like a king. His suit was tailored to perfection. His hair swept back just so. And by his side was Lydia. Lydia wasn't a shareholder. She didn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a grocery list. But she was beautiful, she was loud, and she was the daughter of the city's biggest real estate developer. I approached them, my heart hammering against my ribs. I just wanted to be acknowledged. I wanted him to say, "This is Alara, the woman who made this all possible." "Julian," I said softly, stepping into the circle. "The investors from the Vanguard Group are asking about the Q4 projections. I have the data on my phone if you want to." Julian didn't even turn his head. He just sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. "Not now, Alara," he muttered, his voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We're having a real conversation. Why don't you go find the appetizer tray? I think I saw some of those tiny quiches you like." The circle of men chuckled. Lydia let out a high-pitched, melodic giggle and leaned into Julian's shoulder. "Oh, Julian," she cooed. "Don't be mean. She's just trying to be helpful. It must be so hard for her, trying to keep up with everything you do." Julian finally looked at me then. But it wasn't the look of a partner. It was the look you give a stray dog that won't stop barking at the dinner table. "Go on, Alara," he said, flicking his hand as if shooing a fly. "Enjoy the party. You've done your part for the year. Just try to stay out of the photos, okay? The investors are looking for a specific aesthetic tonight." I stood there, frozen. My 30% stake felt like a weight around my neck. I had given him my youth, my brilliance, and my loyalty. And in return, he was treating me like a charity case he was forced to invite. I walked away. I didn't go to the appetizer tray. I walked out onto the balcony, where the Pennsylvania wind cut through my silk dress like a knife. I let the first tear fall, but I didn't let it linger. Because as I looked out over the skyline, I remembered something Julian had forgotten. He thought I was Alara Vance, the girl from the suburbs who got lucky with a tech startup. He forgot that Vance was my mother's name. He forgot that I had spent my entire life running away from a name that carried more power than his entire company combined. He wanted a war of aesthetics? Fine. I was going to give him a war of empires. Stop. Right now. Look at that subscribe button. Are you the type of person who stays on the balcony crying while someone else steals your throne? Because if you are, then this story isn't for you. You can leave. But if you've ever felt the sting of being minimized by someone you helped build, if you want to see exactly how a woman goes from a quiet shareholder to a corporate executioner, then you need to subscribe. Most of you won't. Most of you will just watch and let life happen to you. Prove me wrong. Subscribe now, or go to the comments and tell everyone why you're okay with being the one who gets shooed away from the table. I'll be reading every single one. I stayed on that balcony for 20 minutes. My breath hitched in the cold air. I thought about the files in my desk. I thought about the way Julian had been looking at the new contracts. I wasn't just hurt. I was suspicious. Julian Thorne wasn't just a jerk. He was a shark. And sharks don't just ignore you, they isolate you before they strike. Days passed. I whispered to the wind. And the silence grew louder. I didn't know it yet, but the humiliation at the gala was just the opening act. Julian wasn't just trying to hurt my feelings. He was trying to provoke me into making a mistake. He wanted me to quit. He wanted me to hand it over my shares in a fit of emotional pique. But he didn't realize who raised me. My father, Silas Blackwell, always told me, Elora, the loudest person in the room is the weakest. The person who can sit in the silence and wait for the enemy to trip over their own ego. That's the person who wins. I had spent 10 years trying to be the opposite of my father. I wanted to be kind. I wanted to be transparent. I wanted to build something with love. But as I wiped the frost from my cheeks and walked back into that ballroom with my head held high, I realized that kindness is a luxury for those who aren't at war. And Julian Thorne? He had just declared war. I walked back to Julian's side, a fake smile plastered on my face. I watched him toast to his success. I watched him whisper in Lydia's ear. And then, I saw it, a flash of a document in his inner jacket pocket. A document with my name on it, and the word termination. How could you terminate a 30% shareholder? I was about to find out. And the answer would change my life forever. The morning after the gala felt like a hangover, even though I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. The Pennsylvania sky was the color of a bruised lung, heavy and suffocating. I pulled my car into my reserved spot at Thorne Global, the spot I'd fought for. The spot that felt like a tiny piece of territory in a land that was becoming increasingly hostile. I walked through the lobby, my heels echoing like gunshots against the polished granite. Usually, the receptionist, Marcus, would give me a warm smile and a morning, Alara. Today, he looked at his monitor and suddenly became very interested in an email. I felt the prickle of ice on the back of my neck. I headed straight for my office, but as I reached the glass doors, I stopped. There was a man there. A man in a cheap suit I didn't recognize, holding a cardboard box. He was taking the framed photo of me and Julian from the first day we opened this office, the day we laughed until we cried because the air conditioning didn't work and we only had one desk to share. Excuse me? My voice was sharper than I intended. What are you doing in my office? The man looked up, startled. Oh. You must be Miss Vance. Mr. Thorne's office sent over a memo. This room is being converted into a breakout space for the new marketing team. I'm just moving your personal items to storage. Storage? I whispered. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned on my heel and marched toward the corner office, the throne room. Julian's assistant, a woman who usually treated me like a sister, put up a hand before I could touch the handle. He's in a meeting, Alara, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. I don't care if he's meeting with the Pope, I hissed. Get out of my way. I pushed past her. The door swung open. Julian was sitting behind his mahogany desk, looking over a series of spreadsheets. He didn't look up. He didn't even flinch. You're early, he said. His tone as casual as if we were discussing the weather. I thought you'd take the day off after your performance last night. My performance? I slammed my palms onto his desk. Julian, there is a man in my office putting my life into a cardboard box. What is going on? Finally, he looked up. His eyes weren't the eyes of the man I'd spent 5 years building a dream with. They were hollow, cold. Professional in the worst possible way. The board met this morning, Alara. Well, the active board. We've decided to restructure. Thorne Global needs to be lean, and frankly your role as an advisor and shareholder has become redundant. Your 30% stake. It's being moved to a non-voting trust. I felt the air leave my lungs. A non-voting trust? Julian, you can't do that. The bylaws state. The bylaws changed 6 months ago, he interrupted, leaning back and crossing his arms. You signed the amendment, remember? At the summer retreat, you were so busy celebrating the new patent that you didn't even read the fine print of the administrative update I gave you. I remembered that day. We were at a cabin in the Poconos. He had brought me a glass of wine, kissed my forehead, and told me he needed a quick signature to handle the office insurance. I trusted him. I loved him. And he had used that love to put a noose around my neck. You trapped me, I said, my voice trembling. I protected the company, he countered. You're too emotional, Alara. Last night proved that. You're a liability to the brand. If you want to keep the value of your shares, you'll go home, stay quiet, and let me handle the adults table. If you fight this, I'll find a way to make sure those shares are worth exactly zero by the time I'm done. I stood there, looking at this stranger. The man who had used my heart as a stepping stone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the office apart. But then, a cold, familiar sensation washed over me. It was the Blackwell blood. It was the feeling of a predator realizing it was being hunted. You think you've won, I said, my voice suddenly, terrifyingly calm. Julian smirked. I know I have. Go home, Alara. I'll have someone courier the rest of your things. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked out of that office, past the eyes of the employees who were now looking at me with pity. I went to the parking lot and sat in my car. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From rage. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the secure server I had built myself, the one Julian didn't know existed. If he was going to steal my voting rights, I was going to look at exactly what he was so desperate to hide. I spent 4 hours in that car, the rain drumming on the roof, my eyes scanning line after line of encrypted code, and then I found it. Julian wasn't just restructuring. He was bleeding the company. There were payments, millions of dollars going to a shell company in the Caymans. But it wasn't just embezzlement. He was using Thorn Global's assets as collateral for massive, high-interest private loans. He was gambling with our company. And he was losing. But there was something else. I looked at the lender for the latest $10 million infusion. The name on the digital contract made my heart stop. Blackwell Holdings. Julian Thorn, the man who just called me a low-level liability, was being kept afloat by my father's money. He had no idea he was sleeping in a bed made of my family's iron. I closed the laptop. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The quiet girl was gone. Weeks passed. I murmured to the empty car, and the trap was set. I spent the next 3 days in a motel on the outskirts of the city. I didn't go home. I didn't want Julian's courier to find me. I needed to be a ghost. I mapped it out. The debt, the dilution, the lies. Julian thought he was playing a game of checkers. He thought he could move me off the board and the game would be over. He didn't realize that I was the one who built the board. I picked up my phone. I hadn't dialed this number in 3,652 days. My finger hovered over the call button. To call my father was to admit defeat in the life I tried to build. It was to admit that the independence I craved had led me right back to the shark tank I ran away from. But as I thought about Julian's smirk, the way he looked at Lydia while I stood in the rain, the pride I held onto for a decade felt insignificant. I pressed the button. The phone didn't even ring. It just connected. I wondered when you'd see the news about the Thorn debt, a voice said. It was deep, rasping, and utterly devoid of surprise. Hello, Father, I said. You sound tired, Alara. A Blackwell shouldn't sound tired. They should sound hungry. I am hungry, I whispered. I'm starving for justice. Good, Silas Blackwell said. There's a car outside your motel. It's been there for 2 hours. Get in. We have work to do. As the black sedan pulled away from the motel, I looked out the window. My father's driver handed me a tablet. On it was a live feed of Julian's office. He was laughing, clinking glasses with the board members who had betrayed me. He thinks he's safe, the driver said quietly. He thinks he's the king, I replied. He doesn't realize he's just a tenant, and his lease is about to expire. But as we drove toward the Blackwell estate, a thought hit me like a physical blow. If my father had been buying Julian's debt for months, had he been waiting for me to fail? Was this all part of a bigger game, one, where I was just a pawn for both of them? The Blackwell estate doesn't sit on a hill, it is the hill. A sprawling fortress of limestone and iron tucked away in the deepest woods of Pennsylvania. Growing up here, I didn't see walls, I saw boundaries. I saw the physical manifestation of what happens when you have so much power that the rest of the world simply stops existing. I stepped out of the sedan, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. The silence here was different than the silence of my motel room. This was a heavy silence, the kind that precedes an avalanche. I walked through the foyer. The same Renaissance paintings hung on the walls, their subjects watching me with judgmental eyes. My father didn't come to meet me. He didn't offer a hug. Silas Blackwell was not a man of gestures, he was a man of results. I found him in the library. The room smelled of old paper, expensive tobacco, and the ozone of high-end servers huming in the corner. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the dark tree line. 10 years, Alara, he said. He didn't turn around. You managed to stay away for 10 years. I almost started to believe you were as ordinary as you wanted to be. I am ordinary, father, I said, my voice echoing in the hollow room. I just worked for someone who was exceptionally cruel. Finally, he turned. Silas Blackwell looked exactly the same, a monolith of a man with eyes that looked like they had been forged in a furnace. Cruelty is a tool. Julian Thorne didn't use it well. He used it to make an enemy of the only person keeping him relevant. That isn't cruel, it's stupid. He gestured to a leather chair. I didn't sit. I saw the debt files, father. You've been buying up his liabilities for 6 months. Why? You don't play in the tech sector. You build skyscrapers and buy politicians. Why go after a mid-sized firm like Thorne Global? My father walked over to his desk and picked up a crystal decanter. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid. I didn't go after Thorne Global, Alara. I went after the man who stole my daughter's time. I knew the moment you invested your savings into that boy that he would eventually try to devour you. Predators recognize predators. I simply waited at the bottom of the cliff for him to push you off. I felt a wave of nausea. You knew? You knew he was diluting my shares? You knew he was embezzling. And you let it happen? You let me be humiliated at that gala just so you could. What? Prove a point? I let you see the world as it is, he snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. You wanted to build something on merit and partnership. Look where it got you. You were a shareholder who thought she was a person. In this world, you are either the owner or the owned. Julian thought he was the owner. He's about to find out he's the collateral. Look at this, my father commanded. I walked to the desk. The display showed a series of encrypted communications. It wasn't Julian's voice this time. It was the board members, men I had trusted, men who had sat at my dinner table. She's becoming a problem, one voice said. She's asking too many questions about the Cayman's account. Julian says he'll have her out by the end of the month. Make sure the dilution paperwork is ironclad, another replied. If she sues, we'll bury her in the discovery phase. She doesn't have the stomach for a long fight. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just Julian. It was a conspiracy. They had been planning to strip me of my life's work for half a year. They viewed my kindness as a lack of stomach. They think I'm weak, I whispered. They think you're alone. My father corrected. They think you're Alara Vance, the girl with no shadow. They don't know you have the Blackwell shadow behind you, ready to swallow them whole. He leaned in, his eyes locking onto mine. I can wipe them out by morning. I can trigger the default clauses on the loans, seize the assets, and have Julian Thorne escorted out of that building in handcuffs for fraud. But if I do it, it's my victory, not yours. I looked at the data. I looked at the faces of the men who had laughed while I was shooed away from the table. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to be the one to pull the trigger, Silas said softly. I want you to go back there. Not as a victim. Not as a shareholder. I want you to go back as my proxy. I want you to watch the light leave Julian's eyes when he realizes that the woman he called a stray is the only thing standing between him and a cage. I looked at the documents on the desk. All I had to do was sign. I would become the managing director of Blackwell Holdings venture arm. I would have the power to destroy everything Julian Thorne loved. But I knew the price. If I signed, I wasn't just Alara anymore. I was a Blackwell. I was stepping back into the world of blood and iron. I thought about Julian's kiss with Lydia on that stage. I thought about my office being packed into a cardboard box. I picked up the pen. It's done, I said, setting the pen down. My father nodded once. Good. Now, we don't just take the company, we take his dignity. He's planning a press conference for Friday to announce the new direction of Thorne Global. He thinks he's secured a new line of credit. He hasn't, I said, a cold smile finally touching my lips. No, my father replied. He's secured a rope. And you're going to be the one to kick the chair. I walked out of the library, but I didn't go to my old bedroom. I went to the guest wing. I didn't want the memories of my childhood softening my heart. I needed to stay sharp. As I lay in the dark, watching the shadows of the trees dance on the ceiling, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. Alara, I hope you're settling in. I've decided to be generous. I'll add an extra 10,000 to your buyout if you sign the non-disclosure agreement by noon tomorrow. Don't make this ugly. You're better than that. You're right, Julian, I whispered to the empty room. I am better than that. I'm much, much worse. I deleted the text. But as I went to turn off the phone, I saw a notification from the company's internal server. Someone was trying to wipe the Cayman's transfer logs. Someone within the company was panicking. It wasn't Julian. He was too arrogant to panic. There was a mole. Or perhaps, a second traitor. And if I didn't move fast, the evidence I needed to put him in prison would vanish before I ever stepped back into that boardroom. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a discovery you can never unmake. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of a tomb. I spent the night in the Blackwell Library, my eyes burning from the blue light of the tablet. My father's security team had bypassed the encryption on the deleted server logs. I thought I was looking for proof of Julian's greed. I thought I was looking for the trail of his offshore accounts. Instead, I found a ghost. To build Thorn Global, I didn't just work with Julian. I worked with Maya. Maya was my maid of honor. She was my best friend since the first day of college. When I was crying over the initial investment, she was the one who held my hand. When Julian and I were working 20-hour shifts, she was the one who brought us coffee and told us we were going to change the world. I had made her the head of operations. I gave her 5% of my own shares because I wanted her to be part of the dream. I looked at the login ID on the screen. M. Chen, admin. Maya hadn't just helped Julian dilute my shares. She was the one who suggested it. She was the one who showed him how to hide the Blackwell debt signatures. She was the one who told him I was too weak to ever fight back. Maya, I whispered to the empty room. The betrayal of a lover is a wound, but the betrayal of a sister is a poison. It seeps into your bones. It makes you question every memory you've ever had. Was our graduation dinner a lie? Was she laughing at me while we toasted to our forever friendship? You found it, my father said. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded satisfied. You knew about this too? I turned to him, my eyes wet with tears I refused to let fall. You knew it was her. I knew someone had to be feeding him the technical details, Silas said, leaning against the mahogany bookshelf. Julian Thorne doesn't have the brains to navigate a Blackwell-structured trust. He needed an architect. Your friend was more than happy to build the gallows for a price. What price? I asked, my voice trembling. Julian promised her your 30%. Silas replied coldly. She wasn't content with her 5%. She wanted to be the queen of Thorn Global, standing right where you were supposed to be. I felt a coldness settle over me that no Pennsylvania winter could match. The heartbreak didn't disappear, it just calcified. It turned into a hard, sharp edge. I didn't call Julian. I called Maya. Alara. Oh my God, honey, I've been so worried, Maya said. She sounded so perfect, so real. I heard what happened at the gala. Julian is being a total monster. Where are you? Do you need me to come over with wine and ice cream? I looked at the screen at the lines of code where she had erased my name from the company's future. I'm okay, Maya, I said, my voice eerily steady. I'm just staying at a hotel. I need to get some things from the office. Some personal files that Julian's movers missed. Can you meet me there tonight? I don't want to see him alone. Of course, sweetie, she chirped. Anything for you. I'll make sure the security guard lets us in quietly. I'm so sorry he's doing this to you. I know you are, I said. See you at midnight. I hung up. The office was different at night. The shadows were longer, the glass walls reflecting a version of the world that felt distorted. Maya was waiting by the elevators. She was wearing a soft sweater, looking like the picture of concern. She ran to me and wrapped me in a hug. I felt her heart beating. It felt normal. How could a traitor's heart beat so normally? Oh, Alara, she whispered into my ear. We'll get through this. I'm already looking into legal options for you. I pulled away slowly. Are you, Maya? Or are you just looking into how to transfer the rest of my voting block to your name? The silence that followed was heavy. The smile on Maya's face didn't fall all at once. It drifted. It wavered. Then it vanished. She took a step back, her eyes darting to the security camera, the one I knew my father's team had already disabled. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice losing its warmth. "I saw the logs, Maya. Chen, admin. You didn't just help him. You were the mastermind. You told him I was too weak to fight. You told him my father was dead." Maya's face changed. The best friend was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone sharp and hungry. "Because you are weak, Alara," she spat, her voice echoing in the empty lobby. "You had all this potential, all this Blackwell power, and you wanted to play house? You wanted to be partners? Business isn't about partnership. It's about taking what you're worth." Julian saw that. I saw that. "You were holding us back with your ethics." "I loved you," I said. It was the last time I would ever say that word to her. "Love doesn't pay for a penthouse in Rittenhouse Square," Maya replied. She stepped closer, her eyes cold. "Go home, Elara. You've already lost. Julian has the board. I have the operations. You're just a ghost in this building. Don't make me call security to throw you out into the rain again." I looked at her, really looked at her. "You're right, Maya," I said. "I was weak. I thought being a friend meant being a shield. But my father taught me something tonight." I pulled out my phone and pressed a single button. The lights in the lobby suddenly flared to life, blindingly bright. On every monitor in the lobby, the ones that usually showed stock prices and company logos, a video began to play. It was the recording of the board meeting from 6 months ago. The one where Maya and Julian talked about burying me. "What is this?" Maya whispered, her face going pale. "It's a live stream," I said. "To every employee. To every investor. And most importantly, to the SEC. My father's team is very good at recovering deleted footage. You think you've won because you have the board." I stepped toward her. "The board is currently being served with subpoenas." "And Julian?" "He's currently at the gala after party, unaware that his private accounts have been frozen." Maya's phone began to chime incessantly. Dozens of notifications. Panic finally set in. "Alara, wait, we can talk about this." "I was just doing what Julian told me to." "No," I said, turning toward the door. "You were doing what a Blackwell does. You were taking what you thought was yours. Now, you're going to pay what you owe." I walked out of the building just as the first police car pulled up. I didn't look back. But as I reached the sidewalk, my father's car was waiting. He lowered the window. "A bit theatrical," he said, "but effective. However, there's one problem." "What problem?" I asked, my heart still racing. "Julian isn't at the after party," Silas said, his face grim. "He's at your house. And he's not alone. He knows the Blackwells are involved now, Alara. And a cornered animal doesn't go to jail quietly." My house wasn't just a building. It was the one place in Pennsylvania that Julian hadn't bought. I had purchased that small, secluded stone cottage with the money my mother left me, the only piece of my life that wasn't tied to the Thorn Global Equity or the Blackwell name. It was my sanctuary. And now Julian was turning it into a crime scene. "Drive faster," I told my father's driver. "The security team is 3 minutes out, Alara," my father said from the seat beside me. He was remarkably calm, his hands resting on his silver-topped cane. "Julian is desperate." Desperate men do not think about consequences. They think about survival. "He's not surviving this," I hissed. As the car pulled into the gravel driveway, I saw the lights were on. Not just the porch lights, every light in the house. The front door was wide open, swinging gently in the cold wind. I didn't wait for my father. I didn't wait for his guards. I sprinted toward the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Julian!" I screamed as I crossed the threshold. I found him in my study. He wasn't looking for jewelry or money. He was tearing the floorboards up near my desk. Books were scattered like wounded birds across the rug. He looked manic, his tie was undone, his eyes bloodshot, his expensive hair matted with sweat. Beside him stood a man I didn't recognize, a heavy-set man in a leather jacket who looked like he dealt in shadows and silence. Julian spun around when he saw me. He held a small, weathered iron box in his hands. My breath caught in my throat. The box. My mother's box. "You really thought you could hide it, didn't you?" Julian laughed, but the sound was jagged, like broken glass. You played the independent woman so well, Alara. But you're just as much of a thief as your father. Put that down, Julian, I said, my voice trembling with a different kind of fear. That has nothing to do with the company. That's personal. Nothing to do with the company. Julian stepped toward me, shoving the box into my face. This box contains the original patent filings for the Blackwell engine. The one your father lost 30 years ago. The one that built the foundation of his empire. I froze. I knew what was in the box: letters, a locket, some old blueprints, but I hadn't realized their value. I hadn't realized I was sitting on a secret that could dismantle my father's history. I'm not going to jail for embezzlement, Alara, Julian sneered. Because if you send those files to the SEC, I send this box to the press. I'll show the world that Silas Blackwell didn't build an empire. He stole one. And you? You're the one who's been hiding the evidence for him. He thought he had me. He thought he had found the one lever long enough to move a Blackwell. He didn't know that my father was standing right behind me. It's a long-standing rule of mine, Julian, my father said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. Never threaten a man with a secret he's already prepared to burn. Julian flinched, but he didn't drop the box. I'll do it, Silas. I've got nothing left to lose. You've frozen my accounts. You've destroyed my reputation. I'll take you down with me. You have one thing left to lose, I said, stepping forward, my eyes locked on Julian's. Your life. Not your heartbeat, Julian, but your life. If you walk out of here with that box, I will make sure you spend every second of the next 40 years in a 6x9 cell. I won't just sue you. I will dismantle you until you're a footnote in a textbook about corporate failure. Enough talk, Julian's hired muscle said, reaching for his belt. In a heartbeat, the room exploded. My father's security team didn't come through the door, they came through the windows. The sound of shattering glass was deafening. Before Julian could even blink, the man in the leather jacket was on the floor, pinned by 3 men in tactical gear. Julian scrambled back, the iron box slipping from his sweaty grip. It hit the floor with a heavy clack. I didn't wait. I lunged for it. I pulled the box toward me, clutching it to my chest like a child. Julian tried to reach for it, but my father's cane came down hard on his hand. I heard the crack of bone. Julian let out a pathetic whimper, clutching his hand and falling to his knees. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a broken man in a ruined office, surrounded by the debris of a life he had tried to steal. Get him out of my house, I said, not looking at him. Alara, please, Julian gasped, the bravado completely gone. I did it for us. I did it so we could be powerful. You don't understand, the board was pressuring me. You did it for yourself, I said, finally looking him in the eye. And you used the only person who actually believed in you to do it. You didn't just lose the company, Julian. You lost the only person who would have stayed with you if the company failed. The house fell silent again, but the sanctuary was gone. The air felt tainted. I looked down at the iron box. My father was watching me, his expression unreadable. Is it true? I asked. Did you steal the Blackwell engine? Are these files the truth? Silas Blackwell looked at the box, then at me. The truth is a matter of perspective, Alara. But if you want to know what's in those files, you'll have to open it yourself. Just remember, once you know, you can never go back to being the girl who lived in a stone cottage. I looked at the lock. I looked at my father. Weeks passed, I whispered. And the box remained closed. But the secrets inside were already screaming. I didn't open the box that night. I put it in my car. But as I was driving away from my ruined home, my phone lit up with an alert from the company's automated security system. Multiple unauthorized login attempts. Location, Sarah's residence. Sarah, the head of marketing. The woman Julian kissed on stage. She wasn't just his mistress. She was currently accessing the company's internal servers to wire the remaining liquid assets to a private account. Julian was the distraction. Sarah was the exit strategy. And she was about to vanish with $50 million of my money. I used to think Sarah was just a puppet, a pretty face in a silk dress that Julian used to fill the space where a partner should be. I thought she was the prize he had won, not the player who had rigged the game. How wrong I was. As I watched the digital tracker on my phone, I realized that while Julian was playing the role of the disgraced king screaming in my study and breaking his bones over an iron box, Sarah was the one actually holding the keys to the vault. She's at the private airfield in Chester County, I told my father's security lead. She's smart, my father's voice came through the speaker. He was back at the estate, already coordinating the legal cleanup. She let Julian take the heat. She let him be the face of the betrayal while she stayed in the shadows, waiting for the smoke to clear so she could walk away with the treasury. She's not walking away, I said. I looked at the data on my screen. Sarah wasn't just wiring the company's liquid assets. She was wiping the intellectual property servers. She was trying to leave Thorn Global as nothing but a hollow shell. She wanted to ensure that when I finally sat in that CEO chair, there was nothing left to lead. The airfield was a ghost town at 3 a.m. A single private jet sat on the runway, its turbines beginning to whine. I saw a silver Mercedes parked near the hangar. I jumped out of the car before it even fully stopped. "Sarah!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the roar of the engines. She was standing at the bottom of the air stairs, a designer carry-on in one hand and a tablet in the other. She didn't look like a woman in flight. She looked like a woman on a business trip. She turned around slowly, and for the first time, I saw her without the mask of the head of marketing. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were as hard as diamonds. "You're late, Alara," she said, her voice cool and steady. "I expected you 20 minutes ago. Julian always said you were slow to catch on." "Julian is currently in a holding cell," I said, walking toward her. "And you're about to join him." Sarah laughed a short, sharp sound. "For what? I haven't broken any laws, honey. I'm a high-level executive with authorized access to company funds. I'm simply moving assets to a secure location during a time of corporate instability. It's all in my contract." "A contract you wrote yourself," I countered. "After you helped Maya and Julian dilute my shares." Sarah stepped closer. She was taller than me, but I didn't back down. "You think this was about Julian?" she whispered. "Julian was a tool. He was loud, he was arrogant, and he was easy to manipulate. He thought he was using me to replace you, but I was using him to dismantle both of you. I don't care about Thorn Global. I care about the 50 million currently sitting in my offshore account. The account I just froze." I asked, raising my phone. Sarah's expression didn't change. She just tapped her tablet. "You froze the primary account, Alara. You didn't find the secondary one. Because you're still playing by the rules. You're still a Blackwell trying to be a good person. And that is why you will always be one step behind me." "You think I'm behind?" I asked. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The Blackwell blood was no longer a burden. It was a weapon. "The plane is leaving in 2 minutes, Alara. Move, or get sucked into the intake." "That plane isn't going anywhere," I said. Behind Sarah, the cockpit window slid open. The pilot, a man who had been on my father's payroll for 20 years, looked down and shook his head. "The flight plan has been cancelled, Sarah," I said. "And the secondary account you mentioned? The one in the name of SM Holdings. My father bought that bank an hour ago. Every cent you moved isn't in an offshore account. It's in a Blackwell escrow." Sarah's face finally cracked. The diamond-hard composure shattered. She looked at her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. "No. That's not possible. I set up the firewalls myself." "You did," I said, stepping into her space. "But you forgot one thing. I built the foundation of Thorn Global's code. Every firewall you used was built on a language I created. I didn't need to break in, Sarah. I just walked through the back door." I reached out and took the tablet from her hand. She was too stunned to resist. "You're not a head of marketing anymore," I said. "You're a thief. And unlike Julian, who was too stupid to know better, you knew exactly what you were doing. Which makes your prison sentence much longer." I watched as the police officers swarmed the runway. Sarah didn't fight. She just stood there, looking at the plane that was supposed to be her escape. "Small victories, Alara," my father's voice whispered in my ear through my earpiece. "But the war isn't over. You've cleared the board of the pretenders. Now, you have to face the real enemy." "Who?" I asked. "The board," he replied. "They're meeting at dawn to declare the company bankrupt to avoid the audit. If they do that, you lose everything. You have 3 hours to get to the city." 3 hours, I said. "That's plenty of time." I walked back to my car, leaving Sarah in handcuffs. But as I pulled out of the airfield, a black SUV pulled up alongside me. The window rolled down, and for a split second, I saw a face I didn't expect. It was Maya. She wasn't in custody. She was holding a folder, and she mouthed 3 words to me before the SUV sped off into the night. He's still alive. Who was alive? Julian? Or the secret in the iron box that was about to blow my world apart? 3 hours. That's all the time I had to stop the board from burning Thorn Global to the ground to cover their tracks. But as I drove toward the city, those 3 words Maya mouthed to me, "He's still alive," were a siren in my head, louder than any police escort. I thought she meant Julian. I thought she meant he had escaped custody. But as I pulled into the underground parking of the Thorn building, my phone buzzed with an encrypted file. It was from Maya. A final gift from a sister who had already cut my throat. I opened it. It was a medical record. A private facility in the Swiss Alps. A patient listed under a pseudonym, funded by a Blackwell shell company for the last 10 years. I felt the air leave my lungs. I pulled the car over, my hands shaking so violently I almost hit a concrete pillar. I scrolled down to the original admission photos. "No," I whispered. "It can't be. It was my brother. Leo. The brother I was told died in the same accident that took my mother. The brother whose funeral I had attended. Whose grave I had visited every year on his birthday. He wasn't dead. He was a vegetable, kept on life support in a gilded cage, paid for by the grief of my father." And then I saw the second document. The reason for the accident. It wasn't a brake failure. It was a remote override of the vehicle's computer system. A system my father had been testing for his Blackwell engine 30 years ago. My father didn't just steal the engine. He had tested it on his own family. And when it failed, he buried the truth and my brother to save his empire. I stood in the elevator, watching the floor numbers climb. 40, 41, 42. I wasn't the quiet girl anymore. I wasn't even a Blackwell. I was a ghost seeking a reckoning. The boardroom doors were locked. I didn't knock. I used the master override code I had written when we first moved in, the one Julian never found. The doors hissed open. The board members, the men who had toasted Julian, the men who had betrayed me, were all there. And at the head of the table, sitting in the chair that should have been mine, was Silas Blackwell. "You're late, Alara," my father said, not looking up from the bankruptcy decree. "We were just finishing the vote. Thorn Global is being absorbed into Blackwell Holdings. The audit is cancelled. The mess is cleaned up." "You monster," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was a dead, flat thing. The board members looked at each other, confused. Silas finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Control yourself, Alara. We've won. You're the CEO of a Blackwell subsidiary now. You have everything you wanted." I wanted the truth. I screamed, slamming the tablet onto the table. The image of Leo, hooked up to a dozen tubes, flickered across the polished wood for every man in the room to see. The silence that followed was absolute. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't even blink, he just stared at the image of his son. "He was a sacrifice for the future, Alara," Silas said, his voice as cold as a tombstone. "Innovation requires a price. I've spent millions keeping him alive. I did it for the family. You did it for your ego." I stepped toward him, ignoring the gasps from the board. "You used Julian to bankrupt this company so you could hide the fact that your engine is a murder weapon. You didn't help me because you loved me. You helped me because I was the only one who could get you close enough to the servers to wipe the evidence of what you did to Leo." "What are you doing?" Silas asked, his voice finally losing its composure. "I'm not CEO of a subsidiary," I said, my finger hovering over the final send button on my phone. "I'm the majority shareholder of Thorn Global. And I just sold my 30% and the voting rights you tried to steal to the one person you can't buy." "Who?" Silas hissed. "The district attorney," I replied. "And the families of every person who has died in a car using a Blackwell engine in the last 20 years. I didn't just find Leo, Father. I found the glitch in the code. The one you've been hiding." The board members scrambled to their feet, their faces white with terror. They weren't just losing their jobs, they were looking at life in prison. "You'll destroy the name, Alara," Silas said, standing up. He looked old for the first time. "You'll be a Blackwell with nothing." "No," I said, looking him in the eye. "I'll be Alara Vance." And I'll have exactly what I started with, my soul. It wasn't security. It was the FBI. Silas Blackwell? The lead agent asked. You're under arrest for corporate espionage, human rights violations, and the attempted murder of Leo Blackwell. I watched as they put the cuffs on the man who had ruled my world. He didn't look at the agents, he only looked at me. You're just like me, he whispered as they let him out. You destroyed a family to win a war. I stood in the empty boardroom. The sun was beginning to rise over Pennsylvania, casting long, bloody streaks of light across the table. I was the only one left. Months passed, I whispered to the empty room. And the silence was finally mine. I reached down and picked up the bankruptcy decree. I tore it in half. But as I turned to leave, my desk phone rang. It was the hospital in Switzerland. Miss Vance? We have an emergency. Your brother, Leo, he just woke up. And he's asking for Julian. Why would my brother ask for the man who tried to destroy me? The betrayal wasn't over. It was just changing shape. They say the truth will set you free. Pause. They never mention that the truth is a debt that must be paid in blood. I was 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, racing toward the Swiss Alps, while the Blackwell Empire crumbled beneath me in Pennsylvania. My father was in a cell. Julian was in a cell. Sarah and Maya were being hunted by every federal agency in the country. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt at peace. But as I stared at the medical report on my lap, I realized that the man I had loved, the man who had humiliated me at the gala, wasn't just a greedy CEO. Julian Thorne wasn't a random variable in my life. He was a piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was part of. He's asking for Julian, the doctor had said. Why would my brother, a man who had been a ghost for a decade, wake up and call for the man who tried to ruin me? I opened my laptop and began to run a cross-reference search that I had been too blinded by love to ever perform. I looked into Julian's childhood. Not the polished version on his LinkedIn, but the raw, unredacted records. Julian's mother hadn't died of natural causes. She had been a lead engineer at Blackwell Holdings 25 years ago. She had been the one who raised the first red flag about the Blackwell engine. And she had disappeared 3 days later. Julian wasn't trying to build a tech empire. He was a Trojan horse. He had spent his entire life grooming himself to get close to a Blackwell. He hadn't married me because he loved me. He hadn't made me a shareholder because he valued my mind. He had infiltrated my life to find Leo. He was looking for the same evidence I had just used to put my father away. We were both hunting the same monster, I whispered to the dark cabin of the plane. But he was willing to kill me to get to the heart of it. The clinic was a fortress of glass and white light, perched on the edge of a mountain. It felt like a place where time went to die. I walked into room 402. Leo looked like a shadow. His skin was the color of parchment, his eyes sunken, but when he turned his head toward me, the Blackwell fire was still there. Elora, he croaked. His voice sounded like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I'm here, Leo, I said, reaching for his hand. It was cold. So cold. Julian. He gasped, his grip tightening with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. Did he get the key? The key to what, Leo? The iron box? I have it. I have the files. Father is in prison. Leo shook his head, a look of pure terror crossing his face. No, not the box. The other key, the one inside the company's main server, the override for the global fleet. Julian. He didn't want to expose Father. He wanted to control it. The air in the room felt like it turned to liquid nitrogen. Julian didn't want justice for his mother. He didn't want to save me. He wanted the Blackwell engine's remote override, the ability to stop any vehicle, anywhere, at any time. He wanted the ultimate power of life and death, and I had just given it to him. By declaring the company bankrupt and letting the Blackwell Holdings legal team seize the servers, I had moved the data to a central location, a location where Julian's remaining loyalists were currently waiting. He played me, I said, my voice barely audible. He used his own humiliation to make me move the pieces where he wanted them. It was a notification from the Thorne building in Pennsylvania. Security breach, server room A. Biometric access granted, Julian Thorne. He's not in jail, I whispered. My father's lawyers, the ones I thought I had defeated, had posted his bail within an hour. They hadn't done it for Silas. They had done it for the new king. Days passed, I said, my voice hardening into something lethal. But I only needed an hour. I looked at Leo. Stay alive, brother. I have one more ladder to build. But this time, I'm the one who's going to stand on top of it while it burns. I walked out of the clinic and called the only person left who hated Julian as much as I did. Maya, I said when she answered. I know you're in hiding. I know you're broke. But I have one last share to give you. I need you to crash the system from the inside. We're going to give Julian exactly what he wants, and then we're going to make sure he's the only one left in the building when it explodes. But Maya's reply made my heart stop. Alara. I'm not in hiding. I'm standing right behind him, and he says, thanks for the key. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with Maya's voice. He says, thanks for the key. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the sterile tile of the Swiss clinic. I looked at Leo, his eyes wide with a warning he couldn't finish. I had spent the last week thinking I was the hunter. I thought I was the one playing the long game, using my father's resources to dismantle Julian's greed. But the board hadn't just been flipped. It had been redesigned from the start. Julian and Maya. The man I loved and the woman I called my sister. They weren't rivals. They weren't even just co-conspirators. They were a team. They had been a team since before I even met Julian. I leaned against the cold glass wall of the hospital corridor. Every memory of the last 5 years flashed before me like a distorted film strip. Maya introducing me to Julian at that college mixer. Maya accidentally finding the discrepancies in the books that led me to investigate the board. Maya being the one to reveal Julian's affair with Sarah. It was all a script. Sarah was the distraction. The gala humiliation was the bait. They needed me to get angry. They needed me to run back to my father. Because only a Blackwell could unlock the vault that held the global override code. Only I had the biometric signature to access my mother's iron box secrets. I was the key. And I had just turned myself in the lock. They're not just taking the company, are they, Leo? I asked, looking back at my brother. Leo's monitor spiked. He knew. They were going to use the Blackwell engine to hold the world's transportation infrastructure hostage, and they were going to do it using my credentials. When the system crashed, when the cars stopped and the planes fell, the digital trail would lead straight to Alara Vance. I wasn't the CEO. I was the fall girl. I didn't have 3 hours anymore. I had minutes. I sat on the floor of the hospital hallway, my laptop balanced on my knees. If Julian and Maya were in the server room, they were currently uploading the final sequence. They had my father in jail, they had the board in chaos, and they had me 3,000 miles away. But they forgot one thing. Maya said she was standing right behind him, which meant they were using the terminal in server room A. The terminal I built. You want the Blackwell engine, Julian? I whispered, my fingers flying across the keys. You want to control the world's movement? Fine. But you forgot the first rule of coding. Never trust a system you didn't write yourself. I bypassed the primary security layer, the one they thought they had stolen. I dove deep into the kernel of the Thorn Global OS. Beneath the encryption, beneath the key I had unwittingly given them, lay a dead man's switch. I hadn't written it for Julian. I had written it for my father years ago, in case he ever tried to take the company back from me. Months passed, I said, a dark smile finally touching my lips, and I waited for a reason to burn it all. Thank you, Julian. You just gave it to me. I initiated the solar flare protocol. It wasn't a shutdown. It was an overload. It would fry every circuit in the Thorn building, erasing the data, but it would also lock the doors. Magnetic seals. Total isolation. Leo, I said, looking at my brother one last time. I have to go. I have to go back to Pennsylvania. Not to save the company, but to watch the look on their faces when they realize they're trapped in a tomb of their own making. I stood up and walked toward the exit, but my phone vibrated one last time. A video call. I answered it. It was Julian. He was in the server room, the blue light of the monitors making him look like a ghost. But he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the camera with the expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Behind him, Maya wasn't holding a folder. She was holding a gun to his head. Alara, Maya's voice came through the speaker, cold and crystalline. You were wrong about one thing. I'm not Julian's partner. He was just the distraction for me, too. Now unlock the solar flare protocol or the man you love dies in the next 10 seconds. The betrayal had a third floor. and I was standing in the basement. There is a moment in every tragedy where the victim stops asking why, and starts asking how. How do I make them hurt? How do I ensure that when the dust settles, I am the only one left standing? I looked at the screen of my phone. The image was grainy, illuminated by the flickering emergency lights of the Thorn Building server room. Maya stood behind Julian, the barrel of a sleek black pistol pressed against his temple. Julian, the man who had mocked me, the man who had tried to steal my legacy, looked small. Pathetic. He was trembling, a bead of sweat tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. Unlock it, Alara. Maya's voice was a whip. I know you initiated the solar flare protocol. I can see the core temperature rising on the monitor. If those servers fry, the data dies. And if the data dies, Julian has no value to me. And why should I care, Maya? I asked. I sat back in the hard plastic chair of the hospital waiting room, crossing my legs. He humiliated me. He betrayed me. He helped you steal my life. If you pull that trigger, you're just doing my laundry for me. Because if I kill him, Maya leaned into the camera, her eyes wide and glassy, I'll set the building to self-destruct. I'm not just talking about the servers, Alara. I've overridden the gas lines in the basement. I'll level the Thorn Building and everyone in a 2-block radius. Is your soul worth 1,000 lives? She was bluffing. Or she was insane. In the Blackwell world, there isn't much difference. You're not going to blow up the building, Maya, I said. Because you're still greedy. You want that 50 million Sarah tried to steal. You want the global override. You can't have those if you're a pile of ash in the middle of Philadelphia. I saw her jaw tighten. I had hit the mark. I have 10 minutes before the solar flare becomes irreversible, I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal hum. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to let Julian talk. I want to hear the truth from the king himself. And then maybe I'll give you the bypass code. Talk, Julian, Maya hissed, shoving the gun harder against his skull. Julian looked into the camera. The CEO was gone. The golden boy was a memory. Alara. I'm sorry. I didn't know Maya was this deep in. I thought we were just taking the company. I thought we were going to be the new Blackwells. She told me your father killed my mother. She said this was justice. Was it, Julian? I asked. Or was I just a convenient way to get the biometric scans you needed? Both, he whispered. I loved you, in my own way, but every time I looked at you, I saw your father's eyes. I saw the man who erased my family. I wanted to hurt him. I didn't care if I hurt you to do it. The honesty was almost refreshing. It was a cold, sharp blade. Maya, I said, turning my attention back to the woman who was once my sister. I'm going to send you a code. It will stop the solar flare. It will unlock the magnetic seals on the server room doors. Maya's eyes lit up. Greed is such an easy emotion to read. But, I added, it's a one-time use. And it only works if I stay on this call. If you hang up, or if you pull that trigger, the building goes into total lockdown and the gas lines will ignite. I've tied the sensor to the audio of this call. I wasn't lying. I had spent the last 3 minutes recoding the solar flare into a dead man's switch. Send it, Maya commanded. I tapped a command on my laptop. A string of 64 characters appeared on her monitor. Execution begins, I whispered to myself. I watched as Maya began to type the code. She was so focused on the screen, so focused on the $50 million and the global power, that she didn't notice the secondary window opening on the bottom of her terminal. I wasn't stopping the flare, I was redirecting it. The solar flare wasn't just a data wipe. It was an electrical surge. By entering that code, Maya wasn't saving the data, she was turning the server room into a giant microwave. Wait, Julian said, his eyes widening as he looked at the cooling fans. They weren't slowing down. They were spinning so fast they were starting to scream. Maya, stop. Something's wrong. Shut up, Julian. Maya yelled, her finger hovering over the enter key. We're almost there. Weeks passed in my mind in those seconds. I narrated. I saw our graduation. I saw our wedding plans. I saw the girl who used to bring me coffee. And then I saw the woman who told me I was too weak to fight. Enter the code, Maya, I said softly. Take what you're worth. Maya slammed the enter key. On the screen, the room was suddenly bathed in a blinding, white light. The monitors exploded in a shower of sparks. I heard a scream, not of pain, but of pure, digital agony as the hardware melted. But the call didn't cut out. Through the smoke and the sparks, I saw the door to the server room slide open. Not because of the code, but because someone had used a physical override from the outside. A figure stepped into the room, silhouetted by the fire. It wasn't a Blackwell guard. It wasn't the police. It was Sarah, and she was holding the iron box. "The game isn't over, Elora." Sarah's voice came through the crackling speaker. "You forgot that I was the head of marketing. And I know exactly how to spin a tragedy." The screen was a kaleidoscope of chaos. Through the flickering video feed, I saw them. The three architects of my ruin, trapped in the cathedral of their own greed. Julian was on the floor, clutching his blinded eyes. Maya was screaming, her gun forgotten as the server racks melted like wax figurines behind her. And Sarah stood in the center of the smoke, clutching my mother's iron box to her chest like a shield. "Sarah," I whispered into the microphone. "How? I saw you in handcuffs. I saw the police take you." Sarah looked directly into the camera lens, a ghost of a smirk appearing through the soot on her face. "Pennsylvania is a small state, Elara. And my father has owned the local precinct since before you learned how to code. You think a few unauthorized transfers were going to keep me down?" She held up the iron box. "I don't need the 50 million anymore. I have the patents. I have the proof that your father is a murderer. And I have the footage of you triggering the solar flare. By the time I walk out of this burning building, you won't be a hero. You'll be the disgruntled shareholder who tried to burn her coworkers alive to hide her family's crimes." I felt the air in my lungs turn to ash, even though I was thousands of miles away. She was right. She was spinning the narrative in real time. To the world, this wouldn't look like a corporate takeover. It would look like my final, desperate act of violence. "You'll never make it out," I said, my voice hardening. "The building is in total lockdown." "Then unlock it," Sarah commanded, her voice dropping to a lethal calm. "Unlock the elevators, or I drop this box into the server fire. Your mother's letters, your brother's truth, it all turns to smoke. Is your revenge worth losing the only pieces of your soul you have left?" I looked at the monitors. Maya was crawling toward the door, her hands burnt. Julian was calling my name, over and over, his voice a pathetic whimper. "Elara, please." Julian gasped. "I'll tell them the truth. I'll tell them it was us. Just let me out. I don't want to die like this." I felt a surge of something cold and heavy in my chest. I looked at Maya, the girl who had been my sister. I looked at Julian, the man who had been my future. "You spent years making me feel like I was nothing," I said, the words falling like stones. "You mocked me at the gala. You laughed while you took my office. You told me I was too weak for this world. But look at you now," I continued. "The king of Thorn Global is begging for his life. The mastermind is crying on the floor. And the star is holding a box of paper, hoping it's enough to save her from the fire I built. Elara. The gas lines." Maya screamed, pointing at the vents. "They're hissing. Unlock the door." I looked at the master control panel on my laptop. One button, one click, and the magnetic seals would release. They could run. They could take the box and start their lies. Or I could wait. "Tell me one thing," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Maya, did you ever actually love me? Or was the last 10 years just part of the aesthetic?" Maya looked into the camera, her face contorted with fear and rage. "I hated you every single day, Elara. I hated your Blackwell money. I hated your genius. And I hated that you thought you were better than us just because you were kind. Kindness is for people who don't have the guts to lead." I felt the last thread of my old life snap. "Thank you, Maya," I said. "For the clarity." I didn't press the unlock button. Instead, I opened the audio channel to the entire building's PA system. "This is Elara Vance," my voice boomed through the burning hallways of the Thorn building. "To the emergency crews outside, do not enter the server room. The hardware is unstable and the data is compromised. The individuals inside are armed and dangerous." "Elara, no." Julian screamed. "Goodbye, Julian," I said. "Goodbye, Maya. Sarah. Keep the box. By the time the fire reaches it, the world will already have the digital copies I sent to the press 5 minutes ago." I watched as the first spark hit the gas vent. The screen went white. "Resolution begins," I whispered. But as the feed cut to black, a single notification popped up on my screen. An incoming transmission from a private, untraceable source. You think you're the only one with a dead man's switch, Alara? Look out the window of the clinic. I froze. I turned my head slowly toward the large glass window of the Swiss clinic, looking out over the snowy peaks. In the distance, a black helicopter was rising from behind the ridge. It wasn't a rescue team. And as it turned toward the clinic, I saw the Blackwell logo on its side. My father wasn't in jail. He had never been in jail. The arrest in the boardroom had been a performance. A play to get me to reveal where I was hiding Leo. The three in the burning building were just the pawns. The mind is a strange thing. It can process 1,000 lines of code in a second, but it takes an eternity to accept a simple, ugly truth. My father had never lost. The handcuffs, the FBI, the moral victory in the boardroom, it was a theater production. Silas Blackwell didn't go to prison. He went to the wings of the stage to watch me lead him straight to his only remaining liability. Leo. I stood in that sterile hospital room, the shadow of the black helicopter dancing across my brother's pale face. He was awake, but he was weak, a flickering candle in a hurricane. Alara, he whispered, his eyes tracking the light of the helicopter's searchlight as it swept across the room. He's here for the harvest. He's not taking you, Leo, I said, though my voice lacked the steel I needed. I looked around the room. One door. 4 stories up. No weapons but my mind, and my mind was currently screaming in a dozen different directions. The helicopter hovered just yards from the balcony. The downwash sent a flurry of snow and ice against the window, sounding like 1,000 fingernails scratching to get in. Through the tinted glass, I saw the side door slide open. Silas Blackwell wasn't wearing a prison jumpsuit. He was wearing his charcoal overcoat, his silver-topped cane gripped firmly in one hand. He looked like a god of the mountain, indifferent and eternal. He didn't need to break in. He just raised a hand, and the electronic lock on the balcony door, a lock I thought was secure, simply clicked open. You always were too sentimental, Alara. My father's voice boomed over the roar of the rotors as he stepped into the room. You thought justice was a real thing. You thought you could put me in a cage with evidence. Evidence is for people who can't afford the judge. Step away from him, father, I said, moving between Silas and Leo's bed. Move, Alara, Silas said. He wasn't angry. He was bored. Leo is a Blackwell asset. He carries the neural mapping data from the original engine failure. He is the only reason the new OS can be perfected. I didn't keep him in this clinic for 10 years out of love. I kept him as a backup drive. I felt a wave of cold fury that eclipsed the Swiss winter. To my father, my brother wasn't a human being. He was a piece of hardware, a backup drive. The Thorn building is gone, I said, trying to buy seconds. Julian, Maya, Sarah, they're finished. You have no company left to run the engine on. Thorn Global was a sandbox, Silas said, taking another step forward. A place to let the children play while the real work happened here. I have a dozen Thorn Globals, but I only have one Leo. Now, move. Or I'll have my men remove you, and I won't be gentle about it. 2 men in Blackwell tactical gear stepped onto the balcony behind him. They were armed. They were professionals. I looked at Leo. His hand reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. He looked me in the eyes, and I saw a silent plea. He didn't want to be saved. He wanted to be released. I'm sorry, Leo, I whispered. Alara, what are you doing? Silas asked, his eyes narrowing. I didn't reach for a gun. I reached for the medical console. You want the data, father? I said, my finger hovering over the purge command for the Neuralink system Leo was still connected to. You want the mapping? If I press this, the system wipes. It will erase everything Leo remembers. It will erase the engine data. And because of the way his brain is linked to the life support, it will end him. The room went deathly silent. Even the helicopter seemed to quiet down. Silas Blackwell stared at me. For the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't calculated. It was shock. You wouldn't, he whispered. You're the good one. You're the one with the soul. I learned from the best, I said. You told me a Blackwell is either the owner or the owned. I'm choosing to own this moment. I'm choosing to give my brother the piece you stole from him. Weeks passed, I narrated, and I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but I never thought I'd be the one holding the scythe. Silas raised his cane, his face contorting into a mask of rage. Stop her. The guards moved, but they were too late. I didn't press purge. I pressed overload. I didn't just wipe the data. I sent a feedback loop through the clinic's entire network. The same solar flare logic I used in Pennsylvania. The monitors in the room exploded. The lights shattered. The helicopter's electronics, linked to the clinic's rooftop landing beacon, sparked and died. I heard the pilot scream as the rotors began to tilt. The room was plunged into darkness, lit only by the orange glow of the failing helicopter engine outside the window. In the chaos, I felt a hand grab mine and pull me toward the service stairs. It wasn't my father. It wasn't a guard. It was a woman's hand. Small, cold, and familiar. This way, Alara, a voice whispered in the dark. It was Maya. She hadn't died in the fire. She was here. And she was holding a syringe filled with something bright and glowing. The king and the queen are dead, she whispered. It's time for the ghosts to take over. Fate has a twisted sense of humor. I had spent the last hour watching Maya burn on a digital screen, and now, her hand was the only thing keeping me from my father's reach. She looked like she had crawled out of the mouth of hell. Her hair was singed, her face a map of soot and raw, red burns. But the syringe in her hand, the one glowing with a faint, bioluminescent blue, was steady. Maya? I choked out, stumbling as she dragged me down the service stairs. How are you? I saw the fire. I saw the explosion. I choked out. You saw what I wanted the cameras to see, Alara, she hissed, her eyes darting to the door behind us. I told you. I built the operations. I knew where the fire suppression vents were. I was out of that room before Julian even stopped screaming. We reached a landing. She shoved me against the cold concrete wall. The building groaned as the helicopter outside, stripped of its electronics, finally slid off the roof. A distant, muffled boom vibrated through my teeth. Why are you here? I demanded. Why save me? You said you hated me. You said I was weak. You are weak, Maya whispered, leaning in so close I could smell the smoke on her skin. But you're the only one who can stabilize the serum. This, she held up the syringe, is the final piece of your father's research. It's the neural bridge stabilizer. Without it, Leo dies in 10 minutes. With it, he becomes the only living record of the Blackwell engine. She wasn't saving me, she was saving the data. My brother's brain was the last hard drive on Earth that held the code she needed to be a goddess of the new world. He's not a program, Maya, I said, my voice shaking with rage. He's my brother. He's a ghost, Alara. And so are you. Look at us. She gestured to the dark, freezing stairwell. Your father is up there looking for a sacrifice. Julian is a pile of carbon in Philadelphia. If you want to walk out of here, you take this syringe, you go back into that room, and you wake Leo up, you give him the strength to walk out of here with us. Alara, don't be a martyr for a dead cause. Bring the stabilizer to me and I'll let you both live. I looked at the syringe. The blue glow pulsed like a heartbeat. If I do this, I whispered to Maya, Leo will never be free. He'll be a target for every government and every corporation on the planet. He'll be a Blackwell asset until the day he dies. He's already that, Alara, Maya said, her voice softening for the first time in years. But if you don't do it, he dies in a dark room while your father watches. Is that the mercy you want for him? I took the syringe. I didn't run down the stairs toward the exit. I turned and started climbing. Back toward the room. Back toward the man who had ruined my mother, my brother, and my soul. What are you doing? Maya called out, confused. I'm finishing the project, I said. I burst back into room 402. The emergency lights were flickering red. Silas was standing over Leo's bed, his hand on the life support switch. He turned, his eyes landing on the glowing blue needle in my hand. There it is, Silas breathed. The Blackwell future. Give it to me, Alara. Be the daughter I raised you to be. I walked toward the bed. I didn't look at my father. I looked at Leo. He was fading. His chest was barely moving. I'm sorry, Leo, I whispered for the second time that night. But I didn't inject him. I plunged the needle into the medical port of the master server, the one controlling the entire clinic's network. What? What are you doing? Silas stepped forward, his cane raised. The stabilizer isn't just for brains, father, I said, my eyes burning. It's a synchronization tool. You wanted to link Leo to the global fleet? I'm linking the global fleet to the clinic's self-destruct sequence. If you don't let us leave, every car, every plane, and every ship using a Blackwell engine in this hemisphere shuts down in 60 seconds. You're bluffing. Silas screamed. Try me. I yelled back. I've spent 5 years building your systems, father. I know where the kill switch is. And I just turned the blue serum into the trigger. Silas looked at the screen. Across the globe, on the digital map, thousands of icons began to turn red. The world was stopping. But as Silas reached for the server to rip it out, Leo's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. My brother's eyes were wide open. They weren't blue. They were glowing with the same bioluminescent light as the serum. He wasn't just awake. He was integrated. Father, Leo's voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from every speaker in the room. The harvest is over. Now, it's time for the winter. Silas Blackwell screamed as the room began to glow with a blinding blue light. There is a moment when the prey realizes it has grown teeth. My father had spent 40 years building a machine that could control the world. He never imagined that the machine would eventually develop a soul, and that the soul would be fueled by 30 years of suppressed agony. Leo wasn't just a man anymore. He was the network. The blue light of the serum pulsed through the tubes, turning his veins into glowing fiber-optic cables. Silas Blackwell stood frozen, his wrist caught in Leo's grip. For the first time in my life, I saw the Titan of Pennsylvania look small. He looked like a man who had tried to cage a hurricane and realized the bars were made of straw. Father, the voice boomed again from the ceiling, the floor, the monitors. It was Leo's voice, layered 10,000 times. You wanted to see the engine run. You wanted to see the power of the neural bridge. Look at what you've built. On the wall of the clinic, a massive projection flickered to life. It wasn't the local stock market. It was a global map of Blackwell Holdings. We saw the refineries in Texas, the shipping lanes in the Atlantic, the corporate headquarters in Philadelphia. One by one, the lights on the map began to wink out. Stop it, Silas screamed, struggling to pull his arm away. You're destroying 40 years of progress. Alara, stop him. He's your brother. He was my brother, I said, stepping back into the center of the room. Now he's your consequence. You thought you could burn the Thorn building and keep your secrets, father, I said, gesturing to the screens. But Leo isn't just shutting you down. He's broadcasting you. To who? Silas hissed. To everyone, I replied. The SEC. The International Criminal Court. Every news station from London to Tokyo. Every person who ever bought a Blackwell car is currently receiving a push notification with the evidence of your crimes. Silas finally broke Leo's grip, stumbling back against the balcony door. He looked out at the night. The black helicopter was a charred wreck in the snow below. His guards were gone, they had fled the moment the blue light took over the building. He was alone. You've left me with nothing, Silas whispered, his voice cracking. I gave you everything, Alara. I gave you the mind to build that company. I gave you the Blackwell name. You gave me a target, I said. And today I finally hit it. Maya stepped out from the shadows of the doorway, the light reflecting off her burned skin. She looked at Silas with a hunger that made my blood run cold. She didn't want justice. She wanted the crown. The board is dead, Silas. Maya said, her voice a low growl. And the heir is taking the throne. Alara, the transfer is complete. The Blackwell accounts are being diverted to the Vance Trust. We've won. I looked at Maya, then I looked at Leo. Leo's eyes dimmed for a second. The blue light flickered. He looked at me, and for a heartbeat, I saw the little boy who used to hide in the library with me. Alara. The speakers whispered. She's not like you. Don't let her. Take it. Maya's eyes snapped to the server. She realized Leo was the only thing standing between her and total control of the new, stabilized Blackwell engine. She raised her gun, not at Silas. At Leo. He's done his job, Alara, Maya said, her finger tightening on the trigger. The world is reset. Now, we just need to delete the source code. The bullet didn't hit Leo. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in red. Silas Blackwell stood between Maya and the bed, his charcoal coat blooming with a dark, wet stain. He had stepped in front of the bullet intended for his backup drive. Was it love? Or was it his final act of ownership? As my father collapsed to the floor, The clinic's self-destruct countdown, the one I had tied to the blue serum, reached 0. System overload imminent, the computer chimed. Goodbye, Alara. The end of an empire doesn't sound like a war. It sounds like a sigh. I knelt on the cold floor of the Swiss clinic, my hands stained with the blood of a man I had spent my entire life trying to escape. Silas Blackwell lay still, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if even in death, he was calculating the cost of his final move. He hadn't died for me. He hadn't even died for Leo. He had died for the legacy, the final, desperate act of a man who couldn't let his greatest creation be destroyed by someone as small as Maya. Drop it, Maya, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Maya stood over us, the gun trembling in her hand. The blue glow from the servers was fading, replaced by the orange flickering of the building's emergency flares. She looked at the blood on the floor, then at the monitors showing the Blackwell accounts being emptied into a void. It was supposed to be mine, she stammered. I did the work. I stayed in the shadows while you played at being a CEO. I deserved this. Look around you, Maya, I said, standing up slowly. I didn't feel afraid of her anymore. I didn't feel anything at all. There is no this left. The company is a ghost. The name is a curse. You killed a titan to take a throne that's currently on fire. A distant explosion rocked the clinic. The floor tilted. Outside, the snow was beginning to bury the wreckage of the helicopter. Go, I said, pointing toward the stairs. Run. Take whatever is left in your pockets and disappear. Because if the police find you here, I won't testify for you. I'll tell them you were the one who programmed the override. I'll make sure the world knows you were the architect of the disaster. Maya looked at me, a flash of her old arrogance flickering in her eyes, but then it died. She saw the look in my eyes, the Blackwell fire that had finally consumed everything else. She turned and ran into the smoke, a shadow disappearing into a larger darkness. I turned back to the bed. The blue light in Leo's eyes had faded, returning to the soft, familiar brown I remembered from our childhood. The serum had stabilized him, but it hadn't made him a god. It had just made him a brother. Alara? He whispered. His voice was his own again. No echoes, no layered frequencies. I'm here, Leo. We're going home. There is no home, he said, a small sad smile touching his lips. Then we'll build a new one, I replied. And this time, we won't use anyone else's blueprints. I picked up the iron box from where Sarah had dropped it. It was scorched, the metal blackened by the fire, but it was intact. I didn't open it to find the patents. I opened it to find the photo of my mother. The one of us at the park before the world got complicated. The Blackwell engine was dead. The global override had been deleted. The billions of dollars were gone, distributed to the families of the victims through an untraceable algorithm Leo had triggered in his final moments of integration. I was no longer a shareholder. I was no longer a Blackwell. I was just Alara. Months passed, I narrated. And the world forgot the name Thorn Global. They forgot the Golden CEO and the Silent Harris. I sat on a porch overlooking the sea, far from the Pennsylvania snow. Leo was in a chair beside me, a book in his hand. The silence here wasn't heavy. It was light. It was the silence of a blank page. But then, the mail arrived. A single, thick envelope with no return address. Inside was a legal document, a deed to a small office building in downtown Philadelphia, and a note, written in a handwriting I would know anywhere. The 30% you held wasn't just shares, Alara. It was a down payment. I'm waiting in the boardroom. Julian. He hadn't died in the server room. I looked at the sea, then at my brother. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new building. One more time? Leo asked, sensing the change in the air. I stood up, the Blackwell fire sparking in my eyes for the last time. One more time. The cycle begins again. If you want to be there when I walk into that new boardroom and finish what Julian started, you know what to do. Subscribe. The next chapter is coming, and it's going to be louder than the last. See you at the table.